any case, this account that was calling for my kidnapping is still there, and it was fundraising to have me kidnapped. And so people on the plane were joking with me, like saying, maybe they have debts and they have they need the money, so they may kidnap me themselves. And then on the way back, I was joking with them, saying, "Well, you're going to die with me." So we were enjoying ourselves on the way and on the way back. I don't recall anyone being particularly frightened, but except for one or two people who were, I think, a bit more apprehensive. But they were anyway, one or two younger people.
Yeah.
So on the way back, there were some maybe one or two people showed their fear, but the others I didn't feel that they were at least showing anything uh, that indicated they were fearful.
Well, it's clear that the Iranian people have showed that they don't fear death in this circumstance. I mean, look at the example of Sayyid Ali Khamenei. He stayed in his home, he didn't hide in a bunker. And the other politicians, Iranian politicians that were walking the streets, rallying with the people against US bombs while their country was actively, being bombed. And, they've showed no fear. And so
And the
that's
rallies were
just,
bombed.
yeah,
That rally where the leaders were participating, they
mhm,
bombed that rally, and the
yeah.
woman was murdered. And there was another rally in Tehran, not far from a studio that I would regularly go to um, during the war, in a place called Artish Square, very close to the square. And there was a nightly gathering because every night across the country, people go to the streets now, every single night,
Yeah.
and in huge numbers in Tehran and elsewhere. It's unbelievable, really, the dedication of people. But in one of the gatherings that's near that square, they fired a missile at the gathering, and a woman was martyred as well.
Before we talk more about that, I want to stay on the negotiations, because I think what's really interesting that you mentioned is that Steve Witkoff was present, Jared Kushner was present, and so it was JD Vance, who was just on the phone with Bibi Netanyahu, just updating him, asking him, getting approval for the negotiations. What exactly
And
does?
others. He made a
Yeah.
lot of phone calls. Apparently, he made maybe a dozen phone calls.
Okay, so what exactly does the United States and Israel want versus what are Iran's demand for peace at this point or ending this
Well,
war?
at the beginning of the war, Trump, like at the beginning of the 12-Day War, Trump demanded unconditional surrender, and of course he didn't get that. And then after a while, he changed it. He changed. They started sending messages to Iran, and the Iranians ignored the messages for maybe 25, 26 days. After 10 days, the Americans started sending messages to Iran, and the Iranians ignored all. Then the Americans gave this 15-point plan during the 5 days of the war, which was rejected by Iran. And then Iran gave a 10-point plan, which the Americans and Trump agreed would be the basis for discussions, for negotiation. Yeah, of course, Trump later rejected this, as Trump always does, and that's why negotiating with him is almost impossible. But um, the 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 10-point Iranian plan that the Iranians put forward was reasonable. I mean, if anyone reads it, uh, compensation for a war that was imposed upon the country illegally, respect for Iran's sovereignty, uh, uh, security for people in Lebanon and Gaza and Yemen and Iraq and so on. Nothing extraordinary, but of course, the empire doesn't seem to think that justice is uh, or reasonable demands are are valid demands. The empire has special rights and privileges, and no one else apparently has any rights whatsoever. So, but when the negotiations took place, it was clear that the Americans wanted what they could not gain on the battlefield. They wanted the Iranians to capitulate. And I don't know why they thought that that would be possible after 40 days of war and failure, but they wanted the Iranians to capitulate. And uh, there's also probably another aspect to it, and that is the Americans and the Israelis wanted to regroup and rearm to prepare for another phase of war, which may be is quite possibly upon us as we speak. We may be at war. They may carry out another act of aggression and carry out mass slaughter and murder in the next few hours and the next few days. It's quite possible, if not probable. So um, it's one of these two things, or maybe a combination of both. Maybe they thought that they could get at the negotiating table some extraordinary concessions. They couldn't, and I think they should have known that. And of course, they were quite probably buying time.
And so, what is Iran's plan going forward? It sounds like Iran doesn't want to negotiate with the United States anymore. At least that's what we're hearing from people on the ground inside of Iran. Is that true?
Well, the Americans want to negotiate, but the Iranians are saying that the United States is violating the ceasefire. They've
Mhm.
imposed a siege on Iranian ports. That's a violation. They've attacked two ships that are connected to Iran. These are violations. And the Iranians are saying that, well, if you're going to violate the ceasefire agreement, then what's the use? What's the point of negotiating uh, new, you know, issues or negotiating an extension of the ceasefire? Because when you're not committed to your current commitments, you're definitely not going to be committed to new commitments. This is basically it. And so, as right now, as we speak, the Iranians have decided they have no plans to go unless there's some change in Washington. If Trump changes his policy or his behavior, then the Iranians may change their decision. But as we speak, I don't know when you're going to publish this, but as we speak, a decision has not been made to go.
Okay, and let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz because Trump, he sanctioned the Strait of Hormuz after Iran had shut it down and only opened it to its allies. They're now charging in the Chinese yuan to pass, but Trump has double closed it, I guess you could say. And so how is that looking like right now? I mean, is Trump's closure, supposed closure and sanctioning of the Strait of Hormuz working? What is it looking like on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz right now?
Well, we have to remember that Iran did not start the war. I know you know it, and I know your viewers know it, but this is something we always have to remember because when you listen to Western media, it's as if we started the war. Somehow it's like we're the aggressor, we're the problem. You know, on day one, they murdered 168 little girls at an elementary school, and you think that nothing really happened because Western media is completely indifferent to this, and the United States has never apologized. It's never even acknowledged the crime that it's committed. And it wasn't. And the Iranians are very confident that it was an intentional strike on the school. And the reason is that it was one of the it was a first wave target, and first wave targets are very carefully vetted. They have weeks, if not months, to vet them. If the war is going on for a few weeks and they're looking for a new target, some officer may be in a rush and make some foolish mistake. But that's not what happened here. There was no war. They had ample time. They chose their targets very carefully. This school was well known. It was there for years. It was on all the Iranian apps, the American apps, the Iranian maps, American maps, I'm sure. And but many of the children were children of military officers. And the belief here is that since this was a first wave of attack and the target was carefully chosen, the Americans wanted to teach Iranian officers a lesson by slaughtering their kids. And if anyone in the United States thinks this is strange, they all they have to do is come to Tehran and look at the places that the Americans and the Israelis have been bombing. They've been bombing hospitals. They've been bombing Red Crescent Society buildings. They bombed the National Emergency Center, which is for first responders. They bombed. I mean, they did so many double tap airstrikes, both the Americans and the Israelis, many across the country. Quite amazing how despicable these pilots are. What you know, I mean, the Israeli pilots obviously they're all monsters, but it's extraordinary how despicable despicable American pilots are too. So they they widely believe that the Americans carried this out intentionally. Um, I forgot what the question was.
The question was about what is happening on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz. Are ships passing through?
Yes.
Is Trump's, sanctioning of the Strait of Hormuz working?
Sorry, I was just in, I was that was the
That's
um
okay.
yeah, that was the background explanation that Iran didn't start the war. So when the war started, uh, countries in the Persian Gulf were a part of the war. Kuwait, Qatar, the Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia were all a part of this war. And they facilitated the U.S. strikes. They helped U.S. naval forces. They helped U.S. Ground forces. The United States would fire missiles from their territory. They would fire from inside bases and outside bases. U.S. troops would be both inside bases. Later, they were moved outside bases. Their assets were outside the bases and even in ports. And American planes would land in their airports. They would use the military bases. So they were a part of the war. And some of the countries, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and Qatar, were funding uh, the uh, the assaults on Iran. So basically, they shut down the Strait of Hormuz for ships linked to these countries and other countries hostile towards Iran. So Iran did not include Russia or China, and then it didn't include Iraq either. After a few days, it said that Iraq is not a part of this. So ships were moving back and forth, but in much smaller numbers during the war. In the ceasefire, the Americans and the Iranians came to an agreement that there would be no more fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon, because there was serious fighting there, and that Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz to further shipping, to more shipping, which would include ships that were from not friendly countries. Yet the Israeli regime refused to carry out the ceasefire. And Netanyahu, I'm sure you recall, carried out that carpet bombing in Beirut and other cities to slaughter people, to wreck the ceasefire. And he killed hundreds of people literally in minutes. And Western media, of course, tried to hide his atrocities by saying these are Hezbollah strongholds or Hezbollah bases, knowing that they were lying because they had journalists in Beirut. And I spoke to two of those journalists. And I told them, "Why are you writing?" Because they both two different journalists called me over a couple of days to get to do an interview for me for a piece that they were writing. And I asked both of them, why are you writing? Why are you saying Hezbollah strongholds in your reports? And both of them said, no, we didn't do that. And they said that the editor did that, and I said, you're complicit. It's in your name. You have no excuse. You can't say someone else did that. So Western media tried to justify the atrocities and pretend that these were airstrikes on Hezbollah, whereas they weren't. And Western media is based in Beirut, so they don't even have the excuse that they had in Gaza. So in any case, Netanyahu wrecked the ceasefire, and the Iranians said, okay, if you're going to wreck the ceasefire, we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz to extra shipping. And Iran stopped and put pressure on the Americans. And after 5-6 days, the Americans, while they were apparently putting pressure on Netanyahu, they also began a siege on Iranian ports. Why? Because Iran was not allowing those extra ships to go through because the Israelis were violating the ceasefire. And the Pakistanis said that Lebanon was a part of the ceasefire. Trump later said it wasn't, but he was lying. The Pakistanis said it was. In any case, after the United States imposed this siege, after 2 or 3 days, Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire, and the Iranians said, okay, now we're going to allow that extra shipping to go through. But Trump, in response, said, but I'm keeping my siege in place. When he said that, the Iranians said, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're not going to allow ships to go through. Why? Because you're violating the ceasefire. First, Netanyahu was violating the ceasefire, and now you're violating the ceasefire. So we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz to those ships. And since Trump said he's going to block all Iranian ships, effectively right now, no ships are passing through. I hear that some Iranian ships quietly pass through, but I don't have details. But of course, the Americans have boarded 2 ships. They struck one and they boarded another. I mean, they struck and boarded one and they boarded another. And so this is where we are right now. The Strait of Hormuz is shut, and the global energy crisis, the global fertilizer crisis, the global helium crisis continues to get worse by literally the minute.
And one of those countries that has actually threatened to join the war if negotiations don't go through and the war doesn't come to an end and it escalates is the UAE, which has been on the international front presenting itself as the victim of Iranian attacks. And we just published an investigation laying out exactly how the UAE is involved in the war against Iran. And so I suggest everybody check that out. We're probably not going to have enough time for me to explain all of the points of this investigation, but something that the UAE's foreign affairs minister has done, her name is Reem Al-Hashimi, is, presented Iran's attacks against the UAE as a form of jealousy. Okay, I know it sounds so funny, but it's true. She has recently come out in this interview, I think it was with ABC News, where she says, the presenter asks her, why do you think, Iran has targeted, bases inside of the UAE? And she says, well, we, the UAE, are everything they are not. We have advanced our society and we have the most beautiful buildings and sophisticated society, and Iran hasn't been able to keep up with us. Such a ridiculous